Welcome back to Accrued Interest. Today, April 2nd, 2025, I'm going to go over the Nintendo Direct event this morning where they released information about the Switch 2 console. But first, a brief disclaimer. As always, the information presented on this podcast is not and should not be considered investment advice. Please make your own decisions regarding Nintendo stock and any other company mentioned on this show. As the world eagerly awaits the 4 p.m. press conference where the United States announces its plans for global tariffs, I wanted to first go over the event that Nintendo had this morning. The Switch 2 is the predecessor to Nintendo Switch, which to date has been Nintendo's most successful console and one of the most successful consoles of all time. To put things in context, it's been about 8 years since Switch 1 launched. The market in general has been anticipating this new product cycle for Nintendo. For a variety of reasons, Nintendo stock has been quite strong recently. Year to date, through April 2nd, Nintendo stock is up about 19%. That is far better than the broader indices, which, including the S&P 500, are currently down for the year. If you want a full breakdown of all the games, the technology, and the specs for the new device, you're probably at the wrong podcast. I'm going to focus on what the announcement today means for Nintendo's stock and how I think you should think about what it means for the company's fundamentals. In part 1 of my Nintendo series, I highlighted 3 things I wanted to think about. A recap. First, you want to get a sense of how many Switch 2 units can be sold on this new cycle. Second, you also want to get a sense of how digital gaming revenue is going to help grow operating margins. And lastly, at the very end, we're going to form our own forecast model for Nintendo to see if investors' expectations are too low, too high, or just right. Nintendo is focused on social gaming. There was a feature that the Switch 2 is going to have for the first time called Game Share. What Game Share does is it allows a user that has one legally licensed copy of a game on their console to share that game digitally or wirelessly with up to 3 other players. This means that if you have a family with multiple kids or multiple players, you can buy one copy of any game and up to 4 people can share in the experience. My favorite add-on device that was announced for the Switch 2 was a social camera. What this camera is going to allow gamers to do is to superimpose their face so anyone playing a game can feel like they're in their living room back in the day, even if the other person is thousands of miles away. On the screen right here, they had an example of a Mario Party game where you have up to 4 players who are using actual physical motions to interact with the game, but can still see each other's reactions. Something to keep in mind with Nintendo Switch 2 release is how Nintendo finds a way to still get money out of its back catalog of games. Nintendo made clear that they're going to have online expansions and features where you can play many of your favorite Nintendo classic games over the years, be they on Game Boy Advance, Nintendo 64, Super Nintendo, or even some software that was on the Sega Genesis. As expected, Nintendo is going to come out the gate swinging with its heavy hitters. The most anticipated game announced during this launch release is going to be Mario Kart World. Many people have been complaining that the new $80 price point seems a bit high. First of all, games are an incredibly economically affordable way to spend your money. That $80 that you pay for this Mario Kart game is going to equal 50 to 100 or even 200 hours of gaming experience. I want to draw your attention to the fact that the Mario Kart series is Nintendo's biggest franchise in general. During the last Switch 1 console cycle, Nintendo sold over 67 million copies of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. I expect the new Mario Kart World to be a monster hit, and since there are going to be game plus console bundles that are sold with the new device, I think Mario Kart World is going to help juice sales even more than they otherwise would have been. The biggest question that we still are not going to know for some period of time is what the impact of expected tariffs out of the United States is going to be on Nintendo business. One thing I want you to keep in mind, I mentioned on the prior video, is that Nintendo has a lot of sales that come outside of Japan. About 77% come outside of its home country. The Americas count for about 44% of sales based on past trends. With the Switch 2 having backwards compatibility, that means for the first time, Switch 2 gamers are going to be able to play Switch 1 games on the same console. I think this is going to smooth out the hardware and software cycle for Nintendo. The fact that you can toggle between Switch 1 and Switch 2 games seamlessly, I think that's going to make it easier for gamers to upgrade this cycle because they're still going to have access to all the games that they paid for before. Something that makes me very optimistic for Nintendo's future profitability is that they announced they're going to be charging more money for physical copies of games than digital copies. This price discrepancy, I think, is going to further push Nintendo users to buy more of their games digitally. For context, over the past 7 years, Nintendo has taken their percentage of gaming software that came from digital sales from 17% back in fiscal year 2018 to as high as 50% in the most recent fiscal year. Nintendo lags the other game companies in this aspect. Right now, they currently under-index in terms of digital sales. In the new cycle, I expect the percentage of digital sales to be well north of 50%. That's going to mean higher margins and higher profit for Nintendo. In general, I thought this was a very strong new product release for the Switch 2 console. We're going to stay tuned for future updates for Nintendo, and then we're going to begin to make our own estimates of how many units that Nintendo is going to be able to sell over the next cycle. As always, thank you for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our curated playlist where you can get updates for each of my companies that I cover individually. Thank you.